Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Carrie Burke, your moderator for today's webinar, Application Asset Management with ThreadFix. You may send in questions at any time during the presentation via the chat feature. We will collect these and address them at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Dan Cornell, a globally recognized application security expert who holds over 15 years of experience architecting, developing, and securing web-based software systems. As Chief Technology Officer and Principal at Denim Group, he leads the technology team to help Fortune 500 companies and government organizations integrate security throughout the development process.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining in today. Really appreciate y'all taking the time to tune in for this. And today we're going to be talking about application asset management in the context of ThreadFix. And this is something where this is something I've been doing a lot of work on, in the past months, really over the past year or so. Because this concept of attack surface is one that I think is really important, and we'll highlight a couple of open source tools. I'll also mention a couple of commercial folks that are in this space as well. But this concept of attack surface, I think, is really important for organizations to understand, and we're going to look at how some of the capabilities in ThreadFix can help you, can help you with your asset management practices. Again, anybody on this call probably has a pretty good background with Denim Group. We're we look to be a trusted advisor for software risk with our advisory services, assessment and testing services. And we've also got our ThreadFix vulnerability resolution platform, which is going to be, again, central to a lot of the things that we talk about today. The agenda for today, what we're going to talk about. First, I'm going to talk about the need for application asset management. When you look at, again, organizations' attack surface, applications are a very critical part of that. And so I'll talk about what we've found to be the importance of managing your application assets. Then I'll provide a quick ThreadFix overview. Again, a lot of the people tuning in today probably are familiar with ThreadFix. For those that aren't, or for people that are super interested in a refresh, we're going to talk through the kind of what the ThreadFix platform is and then how organizations use that to run their application and software security programs. And then we're going to dive in and look specifically at certain capabilities we've built into the ThreadFix platform that help organizations with their application asset management, and look at some of the data fields, some of the capabilities that are of particular interest to organizations as they try to get an accurate assessment of their application attack surface. And then we'll look at two different tools you can use to automate the process, nmap and OWASP Amass. And then, as Carrie mentioned, we'll have time at the end for questions. Look forward to answering those for y'all. Feel free to submit those again via the chat. So the need for application asset management really comes down to this concept or this concern about attack surface. If you think about your organization, you have certain points where people can reach out and touch you, and that's really what that's really what, when I think about attack surface, what I think of is what are the different points for your organization where they have the ability to reach out and touch and impact the security of your organization, especially in a COVID work from home pandemic world. That's that attack surface has gotten a lot larger because it now goes into everybody's home offices where they're working from. That's not really what we're going to talk about today. Attack surface can mean a lot of things. I include this. This is a cartoon that certain people, some people enjoy it, some people don't. But it looks at the concept of your user being an important part of the attack surface. That's certainly the case. Where we're not trying to user shame with this, but again, if you're thinking broadly about attack surface, it should encompass things like your human user. But for the purposes of what we're talking about today, we're going to be looking at the application attack surface, right? And so this is the software that you deploy in your organization that is going to expose you to some sort of risk. And again, looking very broadly at your application attack surface, that can mean a lot of things. It can mean your custom web applications, web services that you expose, mobile applications, as well as again, looked at very broadly, all of the software that you're using. And so VPN software, Microsoft Word, Outlook, and so on and so forth. For the purposes of this talk, we're going to be looking at the systems that you develop and deploy. Again, that's with organizations that are managing their software risk in ThreadFix. That's typically the scope of what they're looking at. And there's a couple of really interesting commercial providers out there. The Bit Discovery folks, Jeremiah Grossman, Robert Hansen, Helios with Daniel Miesler, HD Moore's Rumble. So there's a lot of kind of commercial interest in this and some investment going into the space because it's a really hard problem. Because organizations simply don't have a concept of their attack surface. If you want to look at some other things that we've published talking about attack surface, I've given a talk looking very specifically at application attack surface. So looking at a given individual application, what is the attack surface of that application? There's a link to some materials and talks that we've given on that, as well as reducing your overall attack surface. That's a talk that John Dixon presented, looking at in budget constrained environment, how do you reduce that attack surface? So we've got some other materials looking at this from slightly different angles. Again, today we're going to look at it from a ThreadFix standpoint. And when we work with organizations rolling out software security programs, there are a lot of challenges. It's not easy to roll out a software security program. All right. First, resources. You have concerns about raw budget and cost issues, the level of effort that goes into rolling out your software application security program. There's resistance from the organization. One of the hardest things about application or software security is it requires your organization to change the way that they're developing software. Apparently, people don't like to change what they're doing. Again, there's open source tools that can help with this, that can help with the raw budget issues, but in a lot of cases don't address concerns with the actual effort that goes into operationalizing these practices. And it's important to view an app security program as a multi-stage process, not a like one instant magical effort. And this is an area where we found that you can use short-term successes to help accrue some gains and use those to fuel further changes. And that's one of the things that we'll look at, again, when we're talking about attack surface. Some organizations we go into have extremely locked down practices for, here is our inventory of assets, here is our inventory of network and infrastructure that supports each of those assets, here's our cloud inventory. There's a minority of organizations that we work with that have these practices locked down. Far more frequently, the real challenge when we work with organizations as they start to roll out an application or software security program is that they don't know what their application attack surface is. And they simply don't have a good comprehensive list of their application assets. Maybe they have individual pockets of knowledge, as well as other areas of ignorance, but they just don't know. And what is really dangerous about this is that you can't defend unknown attack surface, right? Like if you don't know that you have certain applications that are deployed and are customer or internet facing, like you simply, you're not going to know. You're not going to be able to defend them. You're not going to assess them. You're not going to monitor logs to look for intrusions. You can't defend unknown attack surface. Another challenge that organizations deal with is if everything is important, then nothing is important, right? And that's something that a concept that I really work a lot to internalize for myself is, there's a lot of, in security, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? There's always stuff to do, and you're never going to have the resources you would like to do everything that you want to do. And so in security, as in life itself, you have to be able to prioritize. And so, translating this, right, first thing you need to figure out, like, what applications you have in your organization, right? So you understand to the greatest degree possible what that attack surface is. And you've got to determine the relative importance of these applications, these application assets, and you're going to treat them differently based on this. Again, that's just the reality of the situation, is you can't treat everything equally, and you shouldn't. So what does your application or software attack surface look like? Right, when you start out, there's the stuff that you currently know about. And typically in every organization that we've gone into, this is, hey, we've got these critical legacy systems, we've got these notable web applications. And you know about this because a lot of value flows through it. They're subject to different audit protocols. You may have formal service level agreements with customers. Maybe an incident has been caused, but there's some set of applications that of, like, okay, we just know that this stuff is out there and we know that this needs to be in scope for our program. then you start to expand this, right? And that's the question of, well, what other like web applications or services do you actually develop and maintain? And these are going to be, when you go to lines of business, applications that they've developed to support initiatives or products that they have. Maybe there's applications you've deployed for specific events. We see this a lot in the entertainment space, but also in food services and things like that. These kind of event-specific things or promotion-specific applications that came up. Why'd you miss those in the first pass? Your threat was there. Maybe the line of business procured it through a non-standard channel. Maybe you picked it up through a merger and acquisition. That's a big challenge as well. Again, when we look at this OWASP Amass tool, we can talk about some specific ways where that can help with mergers and acquisitions and dealing with the expanded attack surface. Then looking even more beyond that, right? Then you also have software that you bought from somewhere. Again, lines of business have procured this. Maybe there's support applications, infrastructure applications, and why'd you miss these up to this point? Again, a lot of the scanners are really looking for web applications, and so vendors might not be asking you about your non-web application. You're assuming that your application vendor is handling security for those applications. That assumption may be totally justified, maybe totally justified and appropriate, but it's still an assumption that needs it's appropriate to check. And then finally, what do you have for mobile applications? What do you have for applications in the cloud? And this really comes down to like in a modern IT environment. Any jerk with a company-sponsored credit card has the ability to now run their own private procurement office. Again, depending on the controls that you have in place in your organization. And so, again, looking very broadly at software attack surface, there's a lot that can go into that. And so really the first decision that needs to get made is, what do we consider to be in scope for our application security program? And that's going to depend on how you want to manage vulnerabilities and how you want to manage risk. For basically every organization that we work with, like the custom software that they develop in-house is in scope for this application or software security program. More sophisticated organizations start to look, again, a little more broadly, and they're looking at supply chain and supply chain risk, looking at their packaged software, lines of business, kind of important critical software functions. Only the top of organizations are looking typically like really hard at packaged software. And that's where we see, again, like Google Project Zero. Google's big enough that they can care about like everybody else's problems as well as their own, but that is something that we see in a very small minority of organizations, right? But that's a question to ask is, when you're looking at your organization and your software risk, what is the scope? What is inside the line and what is outside the line, right? Like, what are you going to manage internally? And in which cases are you going to, again, maybe subject them to some sort of a procurement process, looking at the security status of stuff that you're bringing in, and in which situations are you just going to say, like, what, Microsoft is responsible for Microsoft Word. We're gonna trust their initiatives, and we're not going to explicitly worry about that. And so what this process typically looks like in organizations that don't have good, strong, centralized control is you want to identify, where are the different homes that we have for applications. And, in a lot of cases, this is going to be your development teams, maybe your DevOps teams now. Those various groups or lines of business are going to be an important source of this type of data. You want to the degree possible, enumerate the applications. You want to collect metadata about those applications so that you can make security and prioritization decisions, and you're going to repeat this process as needed. And the bad news is that you'll never be done. But the good news is, again, by doing this and approaching it in a somewhat structured way, you can start to get a handle on this. And that's, I guess, my message of hope for folks is, like, this is a problem that's never going to be solved. You're never going to be perfect, but it is something where you can start to get this reined in and start to feel a level of confidence that you have, again, at least a certain level of completeness with the portfolio of application assets that you have under management. Where are these applications going to be? They're going to be in your data centers. They're going to be in third-party data centers. They're going to be, cloud providers and so on and so forth. And again, we're going to look at some techniques of how can you, in these different environments, how can you start to collect this information? So now we'll take a brief respite here and talk about the ThreadFix platform. And again, most folks probably have some familiarity with this. If you've joined the webinar, I want to provide a little bit of background for people that maybe don't have as strong a knowledge. If if there's questions that we don't answer in this, obviously, please feel free to reach out, and we would love to talk more about it. So if we look at the origin story, like why did we build the ThreadFix platform? And that came out of some engagements that we had with a financial services company, where they were doing some testing on their critical applications. Again, that first set of applications that you find, when you think about what does my application portfolio look like, and they did a scan of one application with IBM, or at the time I think it was either Sanctum or Watchfire. Now HCL App Scan ran a scan of the application, generated a 300-page PDF with a color graph on the front. Went to the dev team and said, hey dev team, I'm from security, I'm here to help, and here's a bunch of stuff that we found that is wrong with your application. Please fix it. The dev manager, says, okay, well, of this stuff, like which are the ones that we have to fix? And we're like, well, this is security, so it's the most important thing. You need to fix all of it. And the question is like, all right, well, how do I fix it? Like, I think there's a section in the report that talks about that. So the dev manager took that report, promptly and put it in the special drawer in their desk that they have for really, really important documents that they're never going to look at again. A couple months later, that same application was getting scanned. They were doing perimeter web application scanning with Qualys WAS. Ran a scan, got a 200-page PDF document with a different color graph on the front. Security analyst goes to the dev team lead and says, hey, I'm from security, I'm back. We did some more testing. We found this security. We found all these security problems. Oh, by the way, what did you do with that last report? Did you fix all that stuff? So the question goes to the security analyst. So like, well, how is this different than the report that we had before? Are these the same vulnerabilities? Are they different? The answer was, I don't know. So that the dev team member went up to their line of business manager and said, like, hey boss, like I am on board with security, right? I think security is important, but we've also got all these other priorities that we have. Where we've promised important features to a hotshot VP who promised them to an important customer. We've got these, performance problems in production we're trying to debug that are impacting customer experience. We've got all this stuff to do. And now the security people came around and they're actively wasting our time because they're giving us these, 200, 300-page PDFs. They can't tell us where the overlap is and so on and so forth. And so a rock got dropped on the security team that said, thou shalt not talk to another development team until you can provide them a single list of what they need to fix, an explanation of why fixing this is more important than doing the other stuff they have in their backlog, and you need to provide them with instructions on how to actually do it. And we observed this interaction. And what we realized was like no one was acting in bad faith, right? It wasn't like the security people were being jerks. It wasn't like the dev team didn't care about security. Like no one was acting in bad faith. Everybody was trying to do their job, but they were managing the data coming out of these testing activities, and they were managing the communications in a really inefficient and ineffective way. And so we built the ThreadFix platform to help organizations address these issues, right? And so ThreadFix lets you create a consolidated view. Here are all the application assets that we have, and you can load in the results of all the different security testing activities that you're undertaking. So you get a consolidated view of all your applications and the associated vulnerabilities, right? Then you can prioritize the application risk decisions based on this data, right? You don't have blobs of PDFs and Excel spreadsheets and things like that. You can slice and dice and say, I want to see vulnerabilities that have these characteristics. Sort by severity, then sort by the type of analysis that we found them. Right? Let's slice and dice this data and make decisions. And this is really critical, is we want to translate these vulnerabilities that security teams care about over to developers in the tools they're already using, right? And that lets us take advantage of the tremendous investment developers have made in selecting and rolling out their tooling. Really, really important. By doing this all in one central place, it gives you access to really powerful analytics about your program as a whole, right? So you're not asking questions, well, here's what our static team did, here's what our dynamic team did, here's what our third-party pen test team did, right? All that data is in one central location. And the value here is that you drive efficiency with automation and orchestration. And so again, and the beautiful thing is, like, every architecture diagram that we have of a ThreadFix rollout looks largely like this, where on the left side of the equation, you have all the testing you're doing, right? Your application testing tools with static, dynamic, interactive software composition analysis. You've got your network scanning tools looking at your network and infrastructure, right? You've got manual assessments that are being done as well as potentially third party, right? And you're doing triage of these vulnerabilities. All that flows into ThreadFix. On the right side of the equation, then you can do reporting and analytics. As I said, you can communicate these vulnerabilities that security teams care about over as backlog or as defects to the defect tracking or application lifecycle management tools like Jira that your dev teams are using. And you can use this data to report up to your governance and compliance folks as well, because you can communicate about the overall status of your program. Again, just looking at the ThreadFix pipeline, the automation, orchestration is a critical part of this, deduping, normalizing this vulnerability data, centrally managing false positives, and then communicating that out to the appropriate stakeholders, preferably in the tools that they're already using. Who benefits? Security teams benefit from this. Allows you to run more efficient. Again, in security, especially in application security, nobody has what they consider to be a sufficient level of resources, at least not in my experience. If you have a team where you feel like you are underworked and are oversupplied with resources, let me know, and I will post your job your job postings out to the internet. I suspect you'll have a lot of people apply. But for the security team, we want to make them more effective, right? And we've seen 2 to 5x increases in throughput, which is fantastic. And using the technology in ThreadFix, we see up to a 35% reduction in the finding count that requires triage, right? So there's, again, for an overworked team, there's less to do. We're making them more effective. For the development teams, we stop the process of emailing them Excel spreadsheets or PDF documents, whatever that might be, and instead we communicate with them in the tools they're already using. Again, on the left side of the equation, they can use Jenkins or their CI/CD pipelines to order testing. On the right side of the equation, they get reports to them in the tools they're already using, such as Jira. And that reduces the training requirement, just makes everything work easier, because instead of security being some super special bolt-on thing, instead security just slipstreams its way into the process as a whole. And again, by doing this for the risk management folks, what we see is a faster resolution of key vulnerabilities. We've seen up to a 44% reduction in the mean time to fix through the usage of the ThreadFix platform to streamline this process. Again, a little bit out of the scope of what we're talking about today, but we've got some blog posts on ThreadFix and Metrics. Encourage folks to take a look at those different use cases for how, as a security manager, you can use the reporting and the capabilities in ThreadFix to help you make really good asset allocation decisions, because that's really the challenge we see in a lot of environments is like you've got limited assets. Where do you allocate those assets so that you can get the best reduction in risk? Great. So now we'll talk and highlight some of the capabilities in ThreadFix that specifically support this application asset management and largely independent or in extension or on top of our ability to manage all the vulnerabilities. And so we'll talk about a couple of things. First, the way that ThreadFix licensing works, where we made some changes, and this has been probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, we made some changes that help support using ThreadFix as an asset management system without incurring licensing, I don't want to say penalties, but increases in licensing. And then we'll talk about like ways that you can build your asset portfolio, how you structure that in ThreadFix, and some specific capabilities in ThreadFix that are of particular interest when we look at asset management. First, from the licensing count, the great news or whatever, ThreadFix licensing is based on your asset count, or is based on the size of the portfolio of assets that you're managing. But these only count when you're actually managing scan or test data. So in your ThreadFix instance, you can have a smaller ThreadFix instance with a low license count. But you can load in as many applications as you want, and you only pay for where the applications where you're actually tracking data. And so you can go into the system settings under administration, look at the license information, and it'll show you, of your allotted application count, here's how many you're actually using. But again, you can load up as many applications as you want into ThreadFix and use the capabilities for like linking and risk management and metadata. You can use all of that for don't want to say infinite. Infinite's a big number, but you can use that for an arbitrary number of applications, and the licensing impact is only for the situations where you have, where you're managing vulnerability data for that application. And then we look at how do we structure this in ThreadFix. In ThreadFix, we have this concept of teams, and it's really an arbitrary container for application assets. It's just a way in a world where you have like a whole bunch of application assets, this lets you say we're going to put these in different buckets. The value of using teams is obviously you don't want to, when you log into ThreadFix, you don't want a list of 1,000 applications or whatever that might be. So you can break this down into teams, and those teams are also linked to ThreadFix's permission system, right? So you can go in and say, for this user who's a security champion for a certain group, I'm going to give them access to a certain level of access to all the applications in this, in this particular team or in these multiple teams, whatever that might be. And so that's one way that these teams provide value is you can have granularity down to individual applications, but you can also, the permissions can also be allocated on a team basis. So you can kind of like chunk stuff together. And how do we see organizations use this? Sometimes it's based on a line of business, sometimes it's based on geography. Again, it's going to depend on your organization. And part of the process of us doing a ThreadFix rollout is working with organizations to understand, tell me about how your program runs, how you're going to be providing access to these different things, how you need to be reporting on this. And we can make we can provide some guidance on what an ideal team structure would look like. And we'll also talk a little bit more about ThreadFix's tagging capability. In a lot of organizations, they need even finer grained control, looking at like lines of business and geographies and kind of cross-cutting concerns. That's an area where ThreadFix tags come in. That also links up with the reporting capabilities. So we'll talk more about that later as well. But at the top level, typically you're looking at chunking things out into different teams. Now, if we look at an individual application in ThreadFix, on the left of the screen here, we see, here's when you create a new application. Here's all the stuff that you can input. And there's a couple of these fields that I think are of particular interest when we look at saying, well, I'm going to manage all of my application assets inside of ThreadFix. And I would characterize these into two different types. The first are linking fields. How do you link this application asset in ThreadFix to external systems or external realities that you have in your organization? And there's also a couple of capabilities that really speak to risk characterization, or the ability to collect metadata so you can make decisions on application. You can collect this information about application. So for the linking field standpoint, again, we're looking at unique ID, your ability to connect to source code repositories, as well as your ability to indicate the network and infrastructure assets that support this application asset. From a risk characterization standpoint, we'll look at the application criticality. As I mentioned, ThreadFix's tagging capabilities, as well as these free-form metadata values. So if we look at linking, this unique ID capability, and what that is that is a unique name for an application within a given team, and it's intended to be to act as a key to an external system. And so in an organization, if you have a CMDB where you've got all of your application assets, this is a great way to pick whatever your ID is in that external CMDB and to link it to the application in ThreadFix. Whatever that might be, this is a way for you to give an application in ThreadFix a unique ID. And have that link to an external application. Some of you out there might be saying like, hey, Dan, I took a database class back in the day, and why is it only unique within a team versus being across the entire application? Great question, I would answer. And the reason for that is what we found in organizations, especially organizations where they had grown up over time with mergers and acquisitions, or where they had different groups that had different CMDBs managing their assets. What we found in a lot of cases were key collisions, and so those need to be unique within a team, not within your entire ThreadFix installation. So there's some good and some bad there, but there's some reasoning why that behaves the way that it does. We also in ThreadFix allow you to link to your source code. And so we submit, Git and subversion repository, Git and subversion repositories. And this is a way to say this particular application asset, here is where the source code is located. You can also specify obviously credentials so that you can connect to the system, as well as if there is a particular branch that you want to track over time, or kind of in a less used way, a specific revision. And this is used by our hybrid analysis mapping when we need to pull source code in order to do different analysis. But even more broadly, this is a way for you to store, here is where the source code resides for this particular application asset. Then we look at IP addresses, and this allows you to link to, if you have fixed infrastructure supporting this particular application asset, you can link to one IP, multiple IPs, and this is also a source that we use for our joint infrastructure and asset reporting. So again, what we look at is as you get a broad set of applications that you want to track, and if you want to enter those into ThreadFix, these are ways that you can link them to other systems that you have within your organization to provide a richer set of data and better, kind of better context and correlation. Now, if we look at characterization, right, we have this concept of criticality. And so for an application, you can say this is critical, high, medium, or low. And this is just a raw score of how critical the application asset is, right? And it's a determination that you make based on whatever criteria you have in your organization, right? And so if you already have an application ranking system, you can map that to these critical, high, medium, low, and store that information. And this is used in ThreadFix as one of the inputs to our relative risks portfolio view, where you can, again, you can look at your portfolio in ThreadFix either in a structured way, saying where are the different teams or the applications under each team, or you can look from a relative risk standpoint, and that's going to pull in this criticality, some tagging information, as we'll see, as well as the open vulnerability counts. So for tagging, this is a free-form way to tag and attach metadata applications, and this is commonly used for environments. So you might create a set of tags that say this application is public-facing, it's partner-facing, it's internal-facing, right? You might say, well, this application, I did my testing in production versus in in pre-production. You might tag and say, well, this application is written in Java, this application is written in Spring, this application is written in Ruby. And so this allows you to capture in a free-form way metadata that is common across different applications in our portfolio. And then on the flip side, this is used by the reporting system where you can drill in and say, well, I only want to see this report, but in the context of these specific tags or these specific characteristics. I only want to see this for applications that are in scope for PCI. I only want to see this report data for applications that are public hosted or whatever that might be. You also have the ability to attach risk ratings to tags. And so you can say, well, something that is public facing, I consider to be riskier versus something that is partner facing that might be of medium risk, and internal facing that might be considered to be the lowest risk. And this also feeds into that relative risk ratings. And we have a number of tagging video resources that are out there that talk about this and give examples in even greater detail. We have an introduction to tagging and an introduction to tagging part 2, which maybe that's no longer an introduction. I don't know. In any case, these 2 videos, if you look at those, they'll go through in more detail and more specifically how you can use tagging in order to understand more about the risk of applications, as well as to feed that into the reporting that you're doing. And we also give you the ability to track arbitrary metadata, right? And so that's where an administrator in ThreadFix sets up various acceptable keys, and then as a user, you can go in and attach different values for a given application. I'll do a quick demo, just kind of like highlighting those specific capabilities. But again, if you want to look at a blog post that we have that talks through this application portfolio tracking, again, we've got a link of that that you can look at as well. And so let me transition here really quickly, and we will here. There we go. We'll go ahead and share this. We can log in. All right. And so from here we see, again, we go into the application portfolio. We have a number of teams here doing various things, and we can go in and look at the e-commerce team. We see the different application assets being managed by the e-commerce team. If we look at the shopping cart application, we can see that we've tagged it here. This is a production. The testing was done in a production environment. This is a public-facing application. It's written in Java, and it's subject to PCI. And for this application, we can go in and look to see we can go and look to see, again, it's got a name, a description, a URL. We've got a unique ID here. As we talked about, that can potentially link to an external system. We've got the team that it's associated with, the criticality that it's associated with. We've got the tags that are associated with the application. And we've got the source code information for this particular app, as well as the metadata, potential metadata values, you can name here, in this case, arbitrarily for an app owner, as well as the IP address details. And so you can, again, in this case, we have a lot of test data that we've managed for this application over time, but that's not required, right? You can create this, you can create entries like this for all of the applications that you have in your portfolio. It doesn't impact, it doesn't impact your licensing. And as I mentioned, we have both the team or structural view of the portfolio as well as its relative risks, and that's going to combine the application criticality inputs from the tags that we have attached to it, as well as the currently open set of vulnerabilities. So if we go in here, we look. Again, these tags are something that you control. So for applications, here we have tags for the environment, as well as the exposure, as well as like languages and types of applications. Again, this is very free form. You can control this. And for a given tag, we can look to see, we can go in and look to see that if we create a tag, you can control what is the associated risk that you want to associate with that. So in this way, these are the capabilities that you can use in ThreadFix to help lay out, for our application asset portfolio, right? Here's how we want to look at these applications. Here's how we consider risk. Here's how we want to be able to report on those. And again, you can store an arbitrary number of applications, independent or independent of your specific licensing concern. So let's go back here. There we go. Now let's look at automating the process. As I mentioned, there's some commercial folks out there that are doing a lot of really good and really interesting work on detecting your application portfolio, or your asset portfolio, not just looking at applications. And each of them has kind of a different approach. And something that I've looked at is all of the perspectives that these various tools or vendors have. Everybody has kind of a different perspective on it, and all those perspectives have value, but there's not. No, I don't think anybody has quite yet found a way to combine all of these together into one kind of unified view where it's, well, here's the developer's perspective, here's the network administrator's perspective, here's the app manager's perspective. So that's, again, going to be an interesting area of work. So if you want to automate this process, which is better than going and typing a million, entering 10,000 application assets. Nmap is a great tool for doing this. You can look for common web server ports, and again, go out and find web applications in your environment, depending on your environment. That's you may have stuff on non-standard ports, and if you know about that, that's great. This is great for environments that you control that are dense. Again, you don't want to scan the internet looking for stuff that may be associated with you, but if you own a data center, if you own here's our class C or several class Cs or whatever that might be, you can use nmap to scan that. And again, I've got a link in the bottom to a blog post that we published a while back, looking at using nmap and some scripting around that to get that data into ThreadFix. Another tool, there's a newer tool, and one that, especially for application asset identification, is really cool. And this is OWASP Amass. I believe Jeff Foley is the project lead on that. But it's a tool that's really handy because what it does is it goes out and scrapes various data sources. So you give it a set of starting points. Here we'll look at using different domain names as a starting point, and then they go out and scrape various data sources in order to identify identify what are hosts or other assets that may be associated with this. And so what we've done that we'll show you here is basically done some scripting using Amass and the ThreadFix API to say, you know, we want to run Amass on an ongoing basis. And whenever we find new application assets, we want to automatically create those inside of ThreadFix. Again, we've got a blog post you can look at to review this. We've got some source code posted to GitHub that you can look at as well. And so we certainly recommend you taking a look at those. Let me go and pull this up here. There we go. Share this terminal. And to show what that process looks like, so we've got this. So if we go in and look at our domains to monitor, right? As I said, that's kind of our starting point, or the seed that we're going to use. So for your organization, hopefully you know I'm www.company.com, but we also have XYZ additional areas. And so Denim Group, obviously we own denimgroup.com, but we also own ThreadFix.it. That's the domain that hosts ThreadFix. We've also got a bunch of other domains for various things. For our purposes here today, we're not going to go too deep into that. Then if we look at, one second, yep. And I, of course, changed something. One moment. So what you do is you give this script. Oops, the new applications, not new apps. And for everybody who's going to totally hack into my ThreadFix instance, I'm totally going to get rid of that API key here in just a second. But you give it a team in ThreadFix, and what it does, it's going to determine here's the domains that I want to look for, and it's going to go and run. And you can see here some of the data sources that it is using. I've got a very vanilla Amass environment set up right now, but it's going to go through and scrape. So here it's found, again, for ThreadFix IT, it's found ThreadFix IT, it's found www.threadfixit. Again, one of the really cool things about Amass is you can give it a like credentials to these various services, HackerOne, Wayback Machine, all of that, and it'll go and do even deeper crawling than we're doing here right now. And let me go ahead and share the whole screen here. There we go. So, okay, so we see this go through. It's going through and it's finding various host names from these various sources. Chewing its way through, and it's really interesting for me to see, the power of Amass to identify stuff that I forgot was out there. Again, Denim Group, we've been around nearly 20 years, so we've got a lot of, if you Google around, there's a lot of stuff on the internet, and I can go look and say like, oh yeah, I remember when that we rolled out that special site or something like that, but that's been decommissioned for a long time. So the stuff that Amass finds, we're not doing any checking right now to see, is this active? What's the IP? You could certainly augment this script with a lot of those types of capabilities. Again, for the purposes of this script that we've published, it's pretty, it's pretty bare bones, but is a good starting point. And then what we're going to do is we're going to auto create those in ThreadFix so that we can go in, again, attach tags and other things like that. Now, if we were to make this script more elaborate, we could auto set via the ThreadFix API more of that metadata if we wanted. But this is a good starting point for folks who may want to, again, who if you don't have a great portfolio, it's a great way to load all of this stuff in. We're now set. We'll let this run a little bit longer here. And what it should be doing, and I don't think it's done this yet. Yeah, it waits to the end to load all the things in. But what this is going to do is this is going to load it's going to create an application entry in ThreadFix for all the new applications that were identified. And one of the other capabilities of Amass that I don't think I mentioned is it maintains a database. And so it can track over time, over subsequent runs, for between this run and this run, or between this time and this time, what new applications showed up and what applications went away. And so that's a really handy capability. And so the way that this script is structured, it allows you to run this via a cron job. For example, you run it via a cron job, every day or something like that, or every week, whatever granularity you wanted to do, and it will identify, like, here's the stuff that we found since the last run, and it'll only create new application assets based on that. So that's a really cool capability of Amass, and it does some visualization stuff. I think I showed, if you look, like that visualization there is out of, is something they have the capability to do as well. There's a lot of stuff that Amass does that we're not talking about here. Again, during this run, we're using like only a fraction of the capabilities of the system. And again, what we're seeing here is we've identified a number of these, application assets, based on scraping these different data sources. We're just going to let that run for a bit longer. And we'll come back at the end. But what I want to do now is open this up for questions. Does anybody have any questions about the stuff that we've talked about here today? Okay, great question here. Well, what network scanning tools does ThreadFix currently support? Yeah, so ThreadFix currently supports Qualys, and it supports apps, or Rapid7, Nexpose, and it supports Tenable Nessus and Tenable Nessus SC. We don't yet support Tenable.io, but if you're interested in Tenable.io support, obviously let us know. We're kind of gathering that information from folks. And so those are the network scanning tools that that ThreadFix supports natively. Excellent. So we got a question here on the on the reporting and how the tags work with reporting, right? And so let me hop back. Oops. Hop out to that, and I can show you. So inside of ThreadFix, when you go to the analytics screen, you can use those tags to filter various reports. And so if we go to our vulnerability search here, for example, we have the ability to go in and filter on the application tags so that we can say, right, like this report's showing it's showing all the critical and high vulnerabilities. We could say that we only want to see those critical and high vulnerabilities for applications that are subject to PCI and those where we did our testing in production, for example. Right. And so, and those tags are a critical part, or an integral part to all the different reporting that we do. And so we can look at this report only for applications with those capability or those specific characteristics. If we go into our point in time report, we can say, well, I only want to see that for the e-commerce team. So we can also filter based on teams. As well as we can go in and say, well, I only want to look at applications, again, that have certain that have certain characteristics. And so both the teams and the tagging are really integrally tied into ThreadFix and how it does both the access management in the case of teams, as well as reporting in the case of both teams and for applications. So it looks like that is nearly finished up there. We're getting there. Let's see. Any other more questions? Can you report on applications that have no scan results? You should be able to report to see that those applications exist, but a lot of the reporting in ThreadFix is based on the vast majority of the reporting in ThreadFix is going to obviously look at the applications. It's going to look at the vulnerabilities associated with the different applications, and that's an area where we don't have a lot of reporting that is specifically built around the portfolio stuff. It'd be interesting to know from folks like what they would like to see in that area. What we have done in a lot of cases is you do have the ability to script against that, and so it's pretty easy to write some simple stuff against the API to pull out the applications that have different characteristics that you have. Let's go and check here on this. Still chewing through a couple of things on the DNS side. Still no applications there. Let's see. Additional question. looking at managing the metadata. Yeah, the metadata. So those can be managed down here. If you go in and look at the metadata keys, those can be associated with scans or with applications. We're talking obviously here in the concept of application metadata. And so here we just have this app owner capability. And you can go and create, an arbitrary set of keys, and that allows you to store, again, information that is, customer particular to your environment where you need some sort of a free form response. And so tags are great to use when hey, we have a specific subset of values that we know that this could be, and we want to be able to report or slice and dice based on that. In the metadata keys are when you have a free form thing where that app owner could be Dan Cornell, or it could be, whoever else that might be. Let's see. Question on explain how hybrid analysis works. That's a whole deal all to its own. But just kind of briefly understanding how hybrid analysis works. You saw where we could connect an application to its source code repository, right? The way that the hybrid analysis mapping works is we pull the application source code and then do a detection to identify what language and what framework appears to be in use for this particular set of source code. And so we'll look and find like, oh, this looks like it's Java, and they have certain config characteristics that make it look like a Spring application. From that, so for the supported languages and frameworks, then we'll build out an attack surface model. So in the case of Spring, for example, we'll go through and look at all of the Java classes, and we'll identify the classes that have like the @controller annotation, as well as, to identify the methods that are the web methods. So then we identify, well, here are the URLs that this application will respond to. Well, we also go through and parse out, calls to things like get parameter, as well as, in the case of Spring, we'll look at the app model classes and identify here are all the parameters that you can pass in for the various URLs. And so from that, what we get is a data structure that allows us to see here's all the URLs that this application will respond to, and all the parameters you can pass in that can change the behavior of the application. And we keep track of the source code responsible for each piece of behavior there. So if you have a dynamic scan that says you have a reflected cross-site scripting vulnerability in the login.jsp for the username parameter, we can query and it'll say, well, that occurred in com.whatever.whatever.logincontroller.java line 42. So if I get a static result that says you have a reflected cross-site scripting vulnerability and the source function is that logincontroller.java line 42, then what the hybrid analysis mapping will do is to stitch those two things together and say, this is not two vulnerabilities, this is one vulnerability that we believe we have two pieces of information about. So great question. And actually, if you go and in this, in the presentation, the deck that'll be up there, I've got a link to another presentation looking at application-specific attack surface. Go and take a look at that presentation or at those slides, and that goes even deeper. A lot of that was based on our hybrid analysis mapping capability. Question, how easy or difficult is it to integrate the tools necessary to feed ThreadFix its data? And so really what that comes down to typically is if we're looking at feeding data about application assets, the important work there, it's all done via the ThreadFix API. And so as long as the tool outputs something in a sensible, structured manner, that makes it really easy to then turn around and make the call into ThreadFix to say, just create an application for this team and create it with these certain characteristics. And so it does require some scripting, but as long as you have structured output, that makes that really straightforward. And that's one of the areas where, like if you look at nmap, and I'm not a nmap super expert, but with nmap, it doesn't necessarily have, it's looking at the state of the network right now, and it doesn't maintain a sort of history. But that's one of the areas where OWASP Amass is, where it's tracking that history over time to say, well, on my previous run, I found these 20 things. I waited a week, I ran it again. 2 of those domains went away for whatever reason, and these 5 showed up, right? And so that's one of the cool things about using Amass as a component of your asset tracking practice is it maintains that history over time, and that makes it really easy to in a case like this, just to say, well, run this in cron and only load in the newest stuff. Like we don't have to go and query ThreadFix and say, hey, did Amass give you this already? Oh yeah, it did. Okay, cool. Then don't create it. Again, we're looking only at the changes, which is really cool. Another great thing to say about the Amass team, I think it was, and again, I think it was Jeff Foley that did this. I was on their Discord server and I had some questions about like a behavior where I had questions about like the behavior of like running a first scan versus a subsequent scan. And they took my questions as a feature request and implemented it in like a day. So that's, I mean, kudos, having been, worked in open source projects and whatnot, like I was really impressed with their responsiveness and again, with the capability of the tool. Next question, is there a role permission grant users access to add applications manually, or is that only for admins? That is a great question. Let me get a response in the show notes to folks. We have, and well, I mean, I guess we can go look at it very quick. Like we can go and look at the specific capabilities. Let's see, where is the user administration? Should be down here. Identity management. There's a lot of different roles that you can have inside of ThreadFix, and so I don't have super. So again, you should be able to. Yeah, that's a permission that you can turn on for a role. Just to answer your question, yeah, there's a. You can craft a role for a user where they, for example, could only create applications, or again have some mix of those. So the permission system in ThreadFix is pretty fine-grained, and you have the ability to control that both to create roles with these fine-grained permissions, as well as to apply those permissions on a per team or per application basis. Let's see, is it possible to add different users, assign specific pages or parts of the application? Developers may share responsibilities for an application or different parts of an application. And so the answer to that is kind of, it depends. You can add, like for an application, if you have access to an application, you either do or don't have access to an application in ThreadFix. But you can craft roles where you would say, people have the ability to upload a scan for this application, or they have the ability to mark false positives for this application. And so, so you can limit capabilities like that, but not to different parts of an application. The question here is like, could I manage, give someone the ability to do stuff on the front end versus the back end? And so the answer is, if in ThreadFix, if that was one application asset, then people would have access to that whole thing. What we have seen, though, a much more common pattern with kind of modern cloud native, like microservices type development, is what an application actually has multiple application assets, where you may have, well, here's an application asset that is all the front end stuff. Here's like 3 application assets that are different services. And here's a application asset that's some other piece. In a case like that, if you made different application assets for those, and that makes sense to do if you're doing scanning at that level of granularity, then you can say, like, this user can only do stuff for this front end application asset versus someone that is accessing has access to multiple pieces. Well, fantastic. Well, good. Well, wanted to thank, if there's no other questions here, and let's see, my demo is running long. I don't know how long Amass is going to keep running. Imagine, if you will, that in ThreadFix we will eventually then create applications under the new applications team here. Hopefully everybody kind of gets the idea. So any other questions from folks? Fantastic. Well, wanted to thank everybody for coming out today. Really appreciate it. If you have any follow-up questions, again, Carrie's going to be posting is going to be posting a recording of this if you want to review anything that we talked about, as well as if you want to share this with colleagues. Carrie will be sending an email out with information as soon as she gets that uploaded here in the next day or so. If you have any additional questions, again, feel free to reach out to me. I'm Dan@denimgroup.com or @DanielCornell on Twitter. Should be pretty easy to find. Really appreciate people joining up today. It's kind of crazy times we live in. It's interesting interacting with folks virtually more than we have been in the past. Hopefully everybody out there is safe and healthy. Again, I've felt very fortunate during crazy times. What we do tends to be easy to do remotely. And so hopefully everybody out there is safe and healthy and counting their blessings. So thanks a bunch to everybody. Keep an eye out for the email from Carrie with the results from this. And everybody take care out there.